The morning I came home from the hospital, I tried to call my grandson. The carrier told me the number was no longer active under my name. My own phone. My own name. Gone. I stood in my kitchen holding that phone for a long time. The plants Diane had promised to water were dead on the windowsill. The mail was missing. And somewhere in the quiet of that house, I understood that something had happened while I was too sick to see it. 3 weeks earlier, I had signed a piece of paper the morning of my open-heart surgery. Diane held the pen out to me and said, "It's just a formality, Mom. Just so I can pay your utilities while you're under." I believed her. She was my daughter. I had no reason not to. I had built that savings account over 30 years of careful living. $94,000. I kept every record in the green ledger my husband started in 1987. I had 3 grandchildren who called me every Sunday. I had a life that was mine, documented and real, and I had handed one piece of it to my daughter because she asked me to and I loved her. When I opened my laptop that afternoon and saw a balance of $214, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I read every transaction line. 12 transfers. 19 days. The first one dated 4 days after my surgery, while I was still in the ICU. I closed the laptop. I opened it again. The number didn't change. What I didn't know yet was that the money was only the beginning of what she had taken. And I didn't know yet that I was going to get it back. The balance was $214. I had read it 3 times before I accepted that the number was not a mistake. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had written birthday cards to my grandchildren for 20 years, where I had balanced that green ledger every month since Harold passed, and I pulled up the transaction history. 12 transfers. 19 days. I read each line slowly, the way you read something you don't want to understand but know you must. The amounts varied. 800 here. 4,200 there. And then, on the 6th line, $38,000. One transfer. To an account number I had never seen. I called the bank. I waited 11 minutes on hold. When the representative answered, I gave him my account number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name. I passed every security question. Then I asked him to tell me who had authorized the transfers. He paused. Not long. Just long enough. The transfers were authorized by your agent of record, ma'am. Under a durable power of attorney filed with this institution on March 14. March 14. The morning of my surgery. The morning Diane had held out that pen and told me it was just a formality. I thanked the representative. I wrote down his name and the time of the call in the margin of the notepad I keep by the phone. Then I sat very still for a moment and looked at the dead plants on my windowsill. Diane had promised to water them. I did not call her yet. That was a decision I made quietly, without drama, the way you decide to put on your coat before you walk out into the cold. I needed to know the full shape of what had happened before I said a single word to anyone. So I started looking. The credit cards were first. I had 2, one I had held for 19 years, one I had opened when Harold was sick to manage his medical bills. Both showed as closed when I logged in. Not suspended. Closed. I called the first issuer. The account had been closed 11 days ago at the request of an authorized user. I asked for the name on the request. The representative said she couldn't provide that information over the phone. She suggested I visit a branch. I wrote that down too. The cell phone account I had already discovered. But when I called the carrier back and asked for the full account history, they told me something I hadn't known. My number had been moved to a family plan under a different account holder's name, used for 9 days, and then removed entirely. Disconnected. As if I had simply stopped existing as a customer. I was 71 years old. I had held that phone number for 12 years. My grandchildren knew it by heart. I went to the post office the next morning. I asked the clerk at the counter if there was a mail forwarding order on my address. She looked it up. There was. Filed 6 weeks ago. All my mail, bills, statements, correspondence, had been redirecting to a street address in Clover Hill. Diane's address. I stood at that counter and kept my face very calm. The clerk asked if I wanted to cancel the forwarding order. I said yes. I asked for a copy of the original request form. She printed it for me. I folded it and put it in my purse. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything I had found in 2 columns, what was taken, and when. The dates told a story of their own. The transfers had begun 4 days after my surgery, while I was still in the ICU. The mail forwarding had been filed before I even left for the hospital. The credit card closures came in the 2nd week of my rehabilitation, when Diane had called me twice to ask how I was feeling and whether I needed anything. I had told her I was improving. She had said she was so relieved. I thought about those phone calls differently now. I called Diane that night. She answered on the 2nd ring, her voice warm and easy, and asked how I was settling back in. I told her I was tired but glad to be home. Then I asked her about the savings account. There was a pause, shorter than the bank representative's, but I heard it. She said she had moved the funds for safekeeping. That she would transfer everything back once things settled. I asked what things. She said, "You know, Mom. Everything." Her voice was still warm. Patient. The voice of someone explaining something obvious to someone who is confused. I said I understood. I told her I was tired and needed to rest. She said of course, get some sleep, she'd check in tomorrow. I hung up. I opened the green ledger to the first blank page. At the top I wrote the date. Below it I wrote, 12 transfers, 19 days, $93,786 removed. Credit cards closed. Phone account severed. Mail redirected. And then, at the bottom of the page, I wrote the question that had been sitting in my chest since I first opened that laptop. What did she tell the grandchildren? I didn't have the answer yet. But I was going to find it. I was going to find all of it, and I was going to write it down in this ledger the same way Harold and I had written down every number that mattered, carefully, accurately, without leaving anything out. Diane thought she had handled a woman who was too sick and too old to look closely at what was missing. She had not met the woman who came home from that rehabilitation facility. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. It was Patricia. Patricia stood at my door holding a covered dish and wearing the expression she always wore when she already knew something was wrong and was waiting for me to say it out loud. I let her in. I didn't have to explain much. She set the dish on the counter, looked at the green ledger open on the kitchen table, and sat down across from me without being asked. She had been a paralegal for 26 years before she retired. She had seen the inside of enough elder law cases to recognize the shape of one before anyone had said the word attorney. She read what I had written. She didn't react the way most people would have, no sharp intake of breath, no hand over her mouth. She just read it the way she must have read case files for decades, carefully, from the beginning, without skipping ahead. When she finished, she looked up and said, "How are you feeling physically?" I told her I was tired but clear-headed. My chest still ached when I moved too quickly, but my mind was working fine. She nodded. "That matters," she said. "That matters a great deal." Then she told me 3 things. She told me that what Diane had done, the transfers, the cancelled accounts, the redirected mail, likely constituted elder financial abuse under our state statutes. That it wasn't just a family disagreement about money. It was potentially a crime. She told me that a power of attorney can be revoked at any time, in writing, as long as the person who granted it is mentally competent. And I was. Clearly. And she told me that transfers made without my direct knowledge or consent, particularly any made while I was incapacitated, may be legally recoverable. I listened to all three. Then I asked her how long it would take. She said, longer than you want. Shorter than she thinks. I wrote that down too. Then I asked the question that had nothing to do with the money. I asked about the grandchildren. Patricia was quiet for a moment. She said that was a separate matter, emotionally, at least. But legally, she said, it starts with the same letter. The same documentation. The same process of establishing what was done and when. She stayed for 2 hours. We went through the ledger page by page. She helped me organize everything into a sequence, not by how it felt, but by date. First this, then this, then this. The way you build something that has to hold weight. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I thought about Caleb. 14 years old. Every Sunday dinner we'd ever had together, every birthday card I'd sent with a handwritten note inside, every phone call that started with him saying "Hey, Grandma," in that half-embarrassed, half-glad way teenagers have when they're happy to hear from you but don't want to seem like it. He thought I had chosen to leave. That was the part that sat in my chest heavier than anything else, heavier than the $214 balance, heavier than the cancelled cards, heavier than the redirected mail. Somewhere in the past 3 weeks, my grandson had been told that his grandmother had decided to go somewhere new and needed space. And he had believed it, because why wouldn't he? Why would a 14-year-old boy question what his mother told him? I thought about what that must have felt like to him. Whether he had tried to reach me. Whether he had decided, in the quiet way young people decide things they don't say out loud, that he must not have mattered as much as he thought he did. That thought made me pick up the phone. I didn't call Caleb. Not yet. I wasn't ready for that conversation, and more importantly, I wasn't prepared for it. I needed to know more before I said anything to him that I couldn't take back. I called Owen. Diane's husband answered on the second ring. I could hear the television in the background, a sports channel, the low murmur of a crowd. He said my name with the particular careful neutrality of someone who has been briefed on what to say and is hoping not to deviate from the script. I didn't give him time to settle into it. I said, "Owen, I only have one question. What date did Diane first access my savings account?" The television kept going in the background. I heard him breathe. I didn't fill the silence. I had learned, a long time ago, that the person who speaks first in a silence like that is the one who loses something. I had nothing left to lose. I waited. He was quiet for what felt like a full minute. Then he said a date. It was 2 days before my surgery. I wrote it down. I thanked him. I said goodnight. I sat with that date for a long time after I hung up. 2 days before my surgery. Before I had signed anything. Before Diane had sat beside me in that hospital room with her warm voice and her reassuring words and her pen. Before there was any legal document in existence that gave her access to a single account with my name on it. She hadn't been waiting to help me. She had been preparing before I was even in the operating room. I opened the ledger to a new line and wrote the date Owen had given me. I drew a small arrow pointing to it and wrote 3 words next to it, before the signature. That changed everything. Not emotionally, I already knew what Diane had done. But legally, Patricia had told me, the timing was everything. If the first transfer predated the power of attorney, then Diane hadn't misused the document I signed. She had acted entirely outside of it. There was no gray area to argue over, no interpretation to debate. She had accessed my account without authorization. Full stop. The next morning I called the number Patricia had written on the back of a grocery receipt before she left, an elder law attorney named Margaret Osei, whose office was 20 minutes from my house. The receptionist asked me to describe the situation briefly. I said, "My daughter emptied my savings account while I was recovering from open-heart surgery. I have documentation. And I have a transfer date that precedes the power of attorney she used to justify it." There was a brief pause. Then the receptionist said Ms. Osei could see me Thursday at 10. I said Thursday was fine. I went to my closet and took down the shoebox where I kept documents I didn't need often but never threw away: old tax returns, the deed to the house, Harold's death certificate, insurance policies. I found the original power of attorney form at the bottom, still in the envelope from the hospital's notary service. I set it on the table next to the ledger. I looked at my signature at the bottom of the form. The pen I had used that morning was a black ballpoint the nurse had handed me, nothing significant about it except that I had held it while I was afraid, while my chest was being prepped for surgery, while I was trusting my daughter to do exactly what she had said she would do. I found that pen in the pocket of the jacket I had worn to the hospital. I don't know why I had kept it. I put it in my purse next to the documents. I was going to need it Thursday. But before Thursday, something else happened. I was going through the stack of mail that had accumulated during my 3 weeks away, the small amount that had arrived after Diane's change of address form was filed but before it took full effect. Most of it was junk. But near the bottom of the stack was an envelope from my grandchildren's school district. It had been opened and resealed, not well. The flap had been pressed back down but the glue hadn't held. Inside was a routine emergency contact update form. The kind schools send out at the start of the year asking families to confirm their information. Someone had filled it out and returned it. The handwriting was not mine. Under emergency contacts, Diane's name was listed first. Owen's name was listed second. My name was not listed at all. In the notes field at the bottom of the form, in Diane's handwriting, were 11 words. Grandmother is no longer local. Please direct all family communications to the above. I read it twice. Then I put it back in the envelope and placed it on top of the ledger. My grandchildren hadn't just been told I had chosen to leave. It had been made official. Filed with their school. Put into a system. Diane hadn't just taken my money. She had taken my place. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. Thursday came with frost on the windshield and a thermos Patricia had pressed into my hands before I could say I didn't need anything. I didn't tell her what I had found the night before. The school form. The 11 words. I put that in the binder too, behind the bank statements, behind the credit card cancellation notices, behind the change of address confirmation I had requested from the post office. I put it there and I closed the binder and I slept 4 hours and I woke up and I got dressed. But I need to tell you what happened before Thursday. Because Thursday only made sense because of Wednesday night. I had been staring at the binder for an hour when I picked up the phone and called Owen. Not Diane. Owen. I had thought about this carefully. Diane would have an answer ready. Diane always had an answer ready. Owen was not that kind of person. Owen was the kind of man who filled silences with whatever was true, because he had never learned the discipline of lying convincingly. I had watched him at Thanksgiving tables for 23 years. I knew what he looked like when he was holding something he didn't want to hold. He answered on the third ring. He sounded surprised to hear my voice. Then he sounded something else, not guilty, exactly. More like a man who had been waiting for a knock at the door and had finally heard it. I didn't ask him how he was. I didn't ask about Diane. I asked him one question. Owen. What date did Diane first access my savings account? The silence lasted long enough that I counted it. 7 seconds. Then he said, Ruth, I'm not asking you to explain anything, I said. I'm not angry with you right now. I just need the date. Another silence. Shorter. He gave me a date. I wrote it in the ledger without saying anything. Then I thanked him, and I said goodnight, and I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a while after that. The house was very quiet. Outside, a car passed. The refrigerator made its low, steady sound. The date Owen gave me was 2 days before my surgery. 2 days before I had signed anything. 2 days before Diane had sat beside me in that hospital room with her reassuring voice and her careful words, "It's just a formality, Mom, just so I can pay your utilities while you're under." She had already been inside my account. The power of attorney hadn't given her permission. She hadn't waited for permission. She had simply decided. I looked at the date I had written. Then I looked at the date of my surgery, which I had written at the top of the same page 3 days earlier. The math was simple. The meaning was not simple at all. I thought about what that meant for a long time. Not about the money, I had already made a kind of peace with the uncertainty of the money. I thought about the decision itself. The moment Diane had sat down at a computer or walked into a bank branch or made a phone call, and had chosen to begin. Before I was in surgery. Before I was unconscious. Before she had any legal standing at all. She hadn't acted out of panic. She hadn't acted because I was suddenly incapacitated and she didn't know what else to do. She had planned it. She had begun it. And then she had come to the hospital and held my hand and told me not to worry. I had looked at her face and I had not known. That was the part one kept returning to. Not the betrayal, I had already named that, already placed it in the ledger where it belonged. It was the not knowing. The fact that I had looked at my own daughter and had not seen it. And then I thought, I see it now. That was enough. That had to be enough. I want to tell you something about that moment, because I think some of you have sat in a quiet house late at night and done this same arithmetic. Added up the dates. Matched them against the explanations you were given. Felt the number come out wrong. The question that comes next is always the same. If I say what I know, what does that cost everyone? I sat with that question for a long time Wednesday night. I thought about Diane's children, my grandchildren, and what any of this would mean for them. I thought about Owen, who had answered me honestly and would now have to live in the same house with what he had done. I thought about what it would mean to take this to an attorney, to make it official, to put it into a system the way Diane had put me into a system. Grandmother is no longer local. I thought about Caleb. 14 years old. Told his grandmother had chosen to leave. Probably wondering, in the way 14-year-olds wonder about things they can't ask directly, what he had done wrong. Whether she had stopped loving him. Whether people you trust simply decide one day to disappear. I could not let him carry that. I would not. The question answered itself. Patricia drove. She didn't ask me anything on the way there. She had looked at the binder the night before, all of it, and she had said 3 things and then she had stopped talking, which is one of the reasons I have kept her close for 11 years. The attorney's name was Margaret Osei. Her office was on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. She was younger than I expected and she read faster than anyone I had ever watched read. She went through the binder without speaking. When she reached the bank statements, she made a note. When she reached the school form, the 11 words, she stopped and read it twice. She looked up at me. "When did you find this?" "Last night," I said. She made another note. Then she reached the page where I had written Owen's date, the date he had given me on the phone, and she set down her pen. "Mrs. Calloway," she said. "This date is 2 days before your surgery." "Yes," I said. "Before any power of attorney was executed." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This isn't a civil dispute about the scope of a POA. This is elder financial abuse. Those are different things. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I told her I understood. She told me what she was going to do, and in what order, and approximately how long each step would take. She was precise and she did not soften anything, which I appreciated. When she finished, she slid a set of documents across the desk for my signature. I reached into my purse. I took out the pen, the one from the hospital, the one I had signed the original document with. I had brought it specifically for this. I didn't explain that to her. I didn't need to. I signed my name. Every page that needed it. It felt different. I had known it would. On the drive home, Patricia asked if I was all right. I said I was. She said, "The grandchildren." "That's still." "I know," I said. "Patricia starts with the same letter." "That's what you told me." She nodded. She didn't say anything else. I watched the road. The frost had burned off by then. The morning had turned into something almost mild. That evening, a certified letter left Margaret Osei's office. It was addressed to Diane Calloway Marsh. And somewhere across town, in a house I had helped furnish and a kitchen I had cooked in for 20 years, my daughter did not yet know it was coming. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday. I know this because Patricia called me that morning to ask if I had heard anything. I told her I hadn't. She said to give it time. I said I intended to. I went about my day. That afternoon, Margaret Osei's office called. Her paralegal told me the bank's fraud division had completed their preliminary review. The findings were consistent with what we had submitted. They were moving forward with the reversal process. $71,000. Not all of it. Not the $23,000 that had already been converted, the mortgage payment, the loan, the vacation charged while I was in the ICU. That money was gone in the way that spent money is gone, and Margaret had told me plainly not to expect it back quickly, if at all. A civil claim had been filed. I would not have to appear. She would handle it. I wrote the number in the ledger. 71,000. I drew a line under it. Then I sat for a while with the ledger open and did not write anything else. Diane did not call. I did not wait for her to. I had one thing left to do, and it had nothing to do with money. I had found Caleb's number through his school's main office. I told them I was his grandmother and that there had been a miscommunication about emergency contacts, which was more true than it was false. They gave me the number listed under a different guardian. A coach, I think. Someone Diane hadn't thought to close off. I called on a Thursday evening. He answered on the second ring. "Grandma Ruth?" He knew my voice. After everything, after months of silence, after being told I had chosen to go somewhere new and needed space, he still knew my voice in 2 syllables. I told him I didn't choose to leave. There was a pause. Then he said, "I know. I always knew something was wrong. I tried to find your number and it said it was disconnected. Mom said you were settling in and needed time." Another pause. I should have tried harder. He was 14 years old and he was apologizing to me. I told him there was nothing he should have done differently. I told him that clearly and without softening it, because he needed to hear it without softening. The call lasted 4 minutes. He cried. I heard it, the way he tried not to, the way 14-year-old boys try not to cry when they've been carrying something for months and someone finally tells them they can put it down. I did not cry. Not while we were on the phone. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. The new plants on the front porch were catching the last of the evening light. I had bought them at the hardware store 2 weeks earlier, not the same kind as the ones that had died, different ones, something that would come back harder in the cold. I had not replanted the old ones. There was no point in that. I cried then. Once. Quietly. Then I got up and made dinner. Over the following weeks, my phone account came back under my name. My credit cards were reissued. My mail began arriving at my own address again. I called each of my grandchildren. The calls were different lengths and different in tone, because they were different people who had been told different things. But I made each one. I did not ask them to choose. I did not explain everything. I only told them the truth about the one thing that mattered. I had not left. I had been removed. And I had come back. Diane has not called. It has been 11 days since the certified letter arrived at her house. I know it was received, the tracking confirmation came through Margaret's office. Signed for at 10:14 in the morning. Margaret says this is not unusual. She says people in Diane's position often go quiet while they assess their options. She says the next contact will likely come through an attorney. I told Margaret that was fine. I had waited longer for less. The green ledger is still on my kitchen table. I open it sometimes, not to add anything, but to read what's already there. The 30 years of careful entries in my husband's handwriting, then mine. The $94,000 balance, circled in blue pen. Owen's date. The transfer amounts. The attorney's notes in the margins. The number 71,000 with a line drawn under it. The last line on that page is still blank. I haven't decided yet what belongs there. Maybe nothing does. Maybe some things don't resolve into a final entry. Maybe the ledger just stays open, the way certain questions stay open, not because the answer doesn't exist, but because living with the question is part of what you do now. I gave her the pen because I trusted her. I picked it up again because I trusted myself. That's the only thing that changed. And it was enough. Diane has not responded yet. 11 days of silence from a woman who always had something to say. I've been thinking about that silence, what it means, what she's doing inside it. Whether she's frightened, or calculating, or whether some part of her, some small part, already knows. I don't know which one I'm hoping for. What I do know is this: I am sitting in my own kitchen, at my own table, with my own name on my own phone, watching my new plants catch the morning light. That's where I am. And I want to ask you something, not about Diane, not about the money, not about what comes next in the legal process. I want to ask you about the moment before any of this. The moment when I closed the laptop, saw the number $214, opened it again, and the number didn't change. There is always a moment like that. A moment when you see clearly what has been done, and you have to decide whether you are going to stay quiet about it, or pick up a pen. If that moment came for you, and I think, for many of you, it already has, what did you do?